Hey guys, and welcome to Witch Talk. We are a couple of witches that talk about witch things, hence the name Witch Talk. Um, Everything that we talk about is our own opinions and our own experiences, and this topic is sometimes a very touchy one. So if you have any questions or any comments, please leave them in the video or on our page, and we're going to try to cover everything as much as we can. So this week's topic is about hexes and curses and other nasties. Um, so yeah, so I figured we'd talk about the ethics part first, kind of start off with that. So what is everybody's ethics, I guess, when it comes to curses and hexing?
I'll let Amy go first.
Why always me first?
Okay, so here's the thing that I see a lot out in the witch world is a lot of people throwing around curses and hexes willy nilly. You guys got to, it's just like paranormal research. You got to take into account psychological. Some people are just assholes. These are things we've got to take into account before you do something like that. You don't just, in my mind, you don't just willy-nilly throw around whatever. And I think that's could potentially backfire on those that do it and those that ask for it. So that's my opinion of it. I just see a lot of that anymore. Is people don't get the information. They just they sell it on Etsy, and I can curse your husband for $29.95. Does that really work? So, I mean, that's just my take on it, at least as far as ethics. I think some research has to be done before people just start throwing around that type of thing. And I think most of the, ethical, lack of a better word, ethical practitioners out there would say the same thing. In fact, the classes that I've taken um, through people like Byron Ballard. What was that?
I apologize.
And Fiona, or not Fiona, Flora Elmore. They both talk about doing your research, finding out what the base issue is before you start just throwing around magic. I think that's what's important first. Amy.
Well, real quick, I was before you start throwing around magic, I would say magic's already thrown out there. I mean,
You know what I
it's all out there. So, but what I take from that, I agree because what you do with it is obviously what we're talking about. So, I agree. Um, Ethics is always kind of a hard one for me, just because to me it boils down to common sense. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot of non-common sense out there.
yeah, there is. There really is. And, you don't have to throw a curse or a hex just because you got pissed off at something. I mean, if your dog poops on the floor, you're going to curse it?
You might curse at
seems,
it.
seems extreme to me. I'm saying. Um, yeah, so I would say like my number one thing that I deal with when I think about hexes or curses or ethics at all is common sense. You have to know your limits. You have to know what you're willing to do, why you're willing to do it, why you're going to do it, and can you do it? And that's the entire thing of it. That's getting the ingredients and doing the prep work and being in the right frame of mind, like you said, the psychological aspect, knowing what the hell you're dealing with, researching, protecting yourself or others, I mean, the whole shebang. You just have to be, I think that you should be a well-rounded witch or practitioner before you dive into the dark pool.
I agree with you, and I don't disagree on the magic thing. But I think that we've talked about this before. I think it's entirely energy. Everything is energy. So I don't. We lost Blythe. Hope it comes back. Um, but okay, so people, let's say, okay, so before I came over here, I ran into a Wiccan, and I'm not dogging Wiccans. I'm just saying, I ran into a Wiccan at my son's work, and she said, my son said, well, I don't really like Wicca, and she's like, well, I'm going to put a spell on you. I'm like, okay. Why? Because he doesn't like what you believe? What are you cursing all of the Christians too? I mean, they don't like you either. So, I mean, I think that there's a level of maturity that a lot of people don't have when they go into and start studying the craft. I think maturity comes with time. It's just like anything else. The more knowledge you have, obviously, the more mature you're going to have too, because you're going to spend more time doing it. You're going to get older. You're going to get wiser. Yada yada yada. And she was pretty young. Um, so it's just one of those things. I think that there's a lot of factors involved that um, most people don't take into account, and I don't think a lot of books cover it either. You get into a lot of the witchcraft books, and they don't cover ethics as much as they probably should. They dive into just giving you what you want, and I get it. They're selling books, but that's not good for the craft, and it's not good for that person or whoever they're horsing around with. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that maturity is a big role in witchcraft. I mean, I've been doing this for, about 16 years, but I mean, there was a long time. I mean, a long, long years and years and years of time that I spent in the beginning where I was just learning. I was learning how things worked, how energy worked. I was learning about plants and wildlife and crystals and ways of doing things, and kind of doing it in theory, like in my head, or and collecting things and feeling how it felt and stuff like that for a long time before I ever did anything. I don't know if that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. For me, I think it was a good thing because I didn't jump the gun or get into something that I wasn't prepared for. And then later came the experience and practice of it, which is what really gives you your own kind of personal path and gives you the experience to, I think, kind of give you that common sense aspect of things.
See, for me, within the first year of studying, I was thrown into, not really thrown into, but the situation that escalated where I had to make a decision. I knew that I needed to do something about this person that I'm going to be connected to forever, and I need to do something about it. So I first started to do sweetening work, is how I started, and it would work for a couple of days. And the reason why it would only work for a couple of days is because this person absolutely hated me. So that was just something that I had to work with. And then it comes to a point, because this was over the course of the past several years, where you have to make a decision if you're going to continue to let the person essentially verbally and emotionally abuse you, or if you're actually going to stand up and actually do something about it, which is what I eventually did. But I think if I tried to go to that extreme in the beginning, it would not have turned out very well, and I was not prepared to actually do that, that hex in the beginning, that first year. I think that's why I more experimented. I think that was my first spell, actually, was the sweetening work and protection work. So I think your ethics as a witch is also connect to your ethics as a person. If somebody is talking ill about you and you're not going to turn around and just punch them in the face, then you're not going to just turn around and just hex them right away. You're going to try to solve the issue first.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Because I don't know if everybody has, but I'd like to think that everybody at some point in time has been in a situation where they're just like, we're over it and just like, you know what, fuck this person. I'm going to do something about it. And you may even get so far as to where you start gathering things and putting things together and kind of getting it in your mind frame of this is the hex that I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. And then when it comes time to do it, I'm like, yeah, I don't really care anymore. So that's a waste of my energy.
I agree with that, and I think one of the things that I try to remember, and I don't do a lot of curses and hex work. I'm just talking magic in general. Is you have to be. I think that you have to be non-emotional about the situation. I think that you have to be you have to have a level tone about yourself before you start doing that type of work. Just simply because, that energy can really kind of go haywire, and you have to know what you're doing. You have to know emotionally where you are, and I think if you, especially if you're doing it for somebody else, you really kind of have to be. Um, and I had the word in my brain, but you have to kind of not have any sort of feeling towards the situation. Does that make sense?
Like be neutral.
Yeah, neutral. That's the word I was looking for. It was in there, it just wasn't coming out. You have to be neutral. I think that, and that's why I think a lot of the gray witches, or what's classified as a gray witch, that's a good area to be in as far as doing this type of work. I think too far one way, you really can't handle it. That's just my opinion. And I think that some of the, like I said, more ethical practitioners out there would agree with that. I think that there's an emotional level that you have to attain before you attempt to try to throw that energy out there.
I think that, I mean, I'd like to agree with that.
You're going to.
Sounds,
stab you in the forehead.
So. Because it sounds so smart. But I don't do workings for other people anymore. So I'm coming from that kind of frame of mind. I think definitely have to have control of yourself. You have to be in the driver's seat. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of workings that can be done when you are super emotionally charged. Because it adds its own kind of flavor. But now you can't be like some emotional train wreck and just like fly off into Neverland with things. But you can still have that really raw primal emotion and be in charge of it, sort of.
Okay.
See, we're on the same page, and I think that's the water sign thing, because we are like ruled by emotions. Depending on the situation, emotions are needed. Emotions can be controlled and used for spell work. I don't think I could ever do any spell work without any. You have to want it. That's part of your intention. You have to want it.
Yes, I agree with that to an extent, but you can't be. You're talking about emotion and wanting it. Those are really kind of two different things, because wanting something to happen and being overly emotional about the situation are two entirely different things. And I think that I think we're on the same page, but we're not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, okay, so let's put it in perspective. We have a good friend that has been abused by some jackass, right? And yes, it's usually the guy that's abusive, so deal with it. We're overly emotional about the situation. I don't think that somebody that is overly emotional about that situation should be trying to do any sort of spell work. It's sort of like being a cop and being overly attached to a case, right? So you kind of have to in those situations. I think it's good to have a group of friends that you trust, that somebody that is more detached from the situation can kind of intervene and do the work for you in that situation, right? Does that make sense? I don't think that somebody that is overly emotional should be casting anything.
It makes sense, but I don't necessarily agree with it.
I'm not going to say that.
Because I think when somebody who is not emotionally attached to the situation, I don't think it would be as effective.
But
Is my personal opinion.
they can think more clearly.
They can think more clearly, but
And that's what's important. I think that that's what's important to spell work is you have to be able to be clear thought.
Right, but just because you're emotional doesn't mean you're not thinking clearly.
That's not necessarily true.
I think we're kind of saying the same thing, but it's just situational.
Yeah.
I think that I think more often than not, the average magic worker should be in control, should be clear-headed, and like, this is what I need to do and this is how I need to do it. But I also think that there are those situations that require that raw emotion to give it like that extra kick. Because there's some spirits that don't want to work with you if you're super controlled. And those are the types of spirits that you should probably be super controlled, just FYI. Just note there. But again, I think it comes down to common sense. Obviously, if I'm an emotional train wreck and I'm just a fucking disaster, then depending on the situation, then I would hope that I'm mature enough to know, all right, I need to take a step back. It's like when you have little kids and they drive you insane and like you want to pick them up and just like rattle their brain or like duct tape them to the wall for a minute.
Yeah.
But you probably shouldn't do that. So that's when you say, I'm going to need you to go to your room until mommy calms down. Because again, you don't want to be out of control, but you can still have the emotion behind it.
You know what? I'm actually thinking the first hex that I ever did, I actually did it when I was in control. I just remember this. Like I said, this was an ongoing situation, and I knew it was going to keep going on. So when there was a lull in the drama was when I buckled down and I did it to keep the other person under control so they would no longer bother me. And after that, they stopped bothering me. So maybe, Jonathan, maybe you do have a point. No, I just remember that. Then there was another time that I did one that was extremely emotionally attached.
I don't disagree that emotion is energy. Emotion is energy. We know that. Okay, that's part of the whole factor. I get that 100%. What I don't think people should be doing is doing magic when they are just so out there. And I think what you're saying is right, Amy, is that it's like an emotional train wreck. Okay, I think if the situation is overly heated, you need to step the fuck back and look at it.
Yeah, don't try and do work if you're unstable.
Yeah, like me.
Sometimes it depends.
No, I'm unstable, and I've actually been called unstable. I'm okay with that.
Well, I'm not ever going to go to someone that has the right to tell me I'm unstable. Assholes. But yeah, so ethics, I think, is it's a personal thing. There's nothing that, I think any of us could say that's like, this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. Because we're talking about witchcraft. It's situational. It depends on the why and the how and the who, and, it depends on so many different things. So we can't really give, like, some definitive answer as to what you should and shouldn't do. It's a personal choice, and I think that we're all basically saying, as far as ethics go, especially when you're talking about curses and hexes, is to just take the time to think about things and use common sense and evaluate and analyze the situation as to whether or not it's worth it to you, if it's worth it to them, whether or not you can even do it. I mean, like I said, know your limits, because I see a lot of people out in the witchy world that talk a lot of stuff, But the more they talk, the more you realize you don't know what in the hell you're talking about. Because you just made that super complicated. And super woo-woo. And it's really doesn't, I mean, I've said this a lot. I mean, simplicity.
I agree. There's a lot of overcomplication in a lot, and a lot of it comes from books. There's a lot of books out there. A lot of the books overcomplicate things. They make it more really than what it is or what it has to be. I think I don't necessarily I don't do ceremony for a specific curse or hex or whatever. I think that energy work is just as effective, and it's a hell of a lot less draining on me and a lot less crap involved to get there. I think that understanding who we are in the world and how we connect to everything kind of gives you an edge to better rid yourself of those types of situations. However, I understand the point of a ceremony because it allows some people the ability to see that part of themselves. Does that make sense? I don't.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that. And I love herbs, love rocks, da da da. We all know that. I don't think that you need all that, but I understand where that's coming from, right? And there's nothing wrong. I work with animal spirits quite often. In fact, I love to get skulls in and talk to them because I'm unstable. But uh, I think that, and there's a lot of great helper spirits out there that can do some wonderful things and help us along our path. But it's not necessary, not necessary. But it does help us. So I get it. I mean, I get it. You'll never see me in a frilly outfit. Just never happened. Telling you all that right now.
Damn.
But you're supposed to wear the tutu. You said it.
Well, biatch, I'm wearing a tutu right now. Oh.
Right now.
I think in some situations, depending on what's going on, hexes can sometimes be almost necessary. Like I said, in my situation, and it was. When I was down in New Orleans for Hex Fest, Dorothy Morrison said sometimes you need to talk to somebody in a language that they understand. So if somebody's being very abusive towards you, or whatever the case may be, sometimes they need to get smacked across the face. And, you get in trouble if you did it, like, for real, so sometimes you have to do it magically. And if somebody actually, honestly, deserves it, I have no problem doing it. Earlier you guys were talking about doing hexes for other people. I don't think I ever would or could because I don't fully know the situation. If I don't fully know the situation, I'm not going to do the spell work for somebody else, which is also why divination and however you communicate with spirits is extremely important because you need to have clarification on what's going on. Because maybe, your boss is just having a bad day or going through a divorce or having issues with their kids, and it's not always an asshole. So you kind of, instead of, hexing them or trying to keep them under control or whatever the case may be, maybe try to help them out a little bit. So there is always a couple ways to tackle a situation. That you don't always have to go for the throat. But sometimes when you get to the point where you feel like you need to go for the throat, you should just go for the throat and get it over with.
And I don't know why, but why is it that hexes and curses, they're always the fun ones?
I think they're the ones that you see. I don't want to say you see the results. That you see them and you pay attention to what happens. And if somebody is causing you problems, it makes you happy to see them kind of get their just desserts.
I think that's part of it too, and I also think because it's taboo. I think that's the biggest thing right there. It's just like it's the things that we can't have, or really shouldn't be doing, I think it's taboo. I think that's why, I think that was part of the reason. Well, there's two reasons I think that this show was so well received. is one, that it's taboo, and two, that it's not covered in a lot of the books out there, and a lot of the teachings and so forth and so on. Byron Ballard said it best when she said that, you have to know both sides of it. You even if you don't do it, you need to understand it. And I think a lot of witches are too far one-sided and either way, and they don't have that good balance. I've always tried to walk a balanced path, no matter what spirituality I may be following, what I'm studying, what I'm doing. I think that that balanced path gives us our power, and I have no problems working in the dark. I just don't. I don't cast that type of energy on a regular basis. I can't say that I never do, but on a regular basis, I don't. I do, um, you know, work with spirit a lot, and that could be considered um, a darker side. But I don't think that, I think that we're going to need to talk about your disruptions during my talking. But
Well, I was going to say something with that, which is, I guess we were saying a little bit before the show went live about it also kind of depends on what you classify or how you define a curse or a hex, because I know that with like folk magic, the type of practice that I have, almost everything that I do, a lot of people would classify as being like darker magic, and like, oh, Amy, look at her, she looks like a school teacher, but all she does is the darkness. And it's like, no, it's just, that's just, I mean, it's the folk practices, it's the way things were done. Like some people are like, oh my gosh, I would never use animal parts, that's bad. Well, I disagree. And so if you practice in a way that you would use animal parts in almost everything that you do, then someone would be able to come to you and be like, oh, well, that person only practices dark magic, or she only does curses and hexes. And we were talking a little bit about even protection work. The way that some people do protection work, some people would perceive as being baneful. Depends on the way you go about it. Depends on how you build the energy and build it all and put it together. So, I mean, it's hard because it's like you want to just like really dumb it down and just say common sense, but you can't really, because common sense is, is to each their own, depending on their life experiences.
don't you think, though, a lot of perception of, say, curses and hexes comes from a misunderstanding, just strictly, of kind of what you're saying about the practice? I think a lot of people would classify most of the traditional witchcrafts as dark magic of any sort.
Yes.
I think because there is a lot of the work with the dead, working with, like you said, animal parts, things like that, or the old one, or some religions like to call him Lucifer. Satan.
Which is a
So,
really good show.
which, yeah, it was a good show. But I mean, that's a perception of the energy. That's not, that's somebody else's perception. That's why, it's like reading a book. That's somebody else's perception. I love Jim McGarry's books, but that's her perception of it, right? That's not necessarily what everybody practices in Cornish witchcraft.
Right.
I think that, and I think you said it earlier I think it was you that said it, but finding your own path and finding your own way in this craft is kind of part of the craft. If you
No,
don't,
it's a huge part of the craft.
if you don't find your own path and you just follow what everybody else does, you're not doing magic. You're doing what everybody else does, which is kind of fucking boring.
Yeah.
But so I think that once we all do it kind of different. We all have similarities, but we all do it differently. But I think that that's because we all have our own way of doing things, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're always going to find similarities. We're always going to find herbology. You're always going to find rocks. You're always going to find energy work. You're always going to find, especially in the traditional crafts, working with animal parts, things like that. Um, but we all have a different way of handling it. I think I just have rocks and stuff because I think they're pretty, and I found
That's
a
why I
house.
have crystals, because I don't really do shit with crystals, really. But I have a bunch of them because they're so pretty.
I like to read things. I like to take things and read it. I like to see its life and the life that it led. That's what I like to do with them. That's not really part of my practice, but it's just kind of who I am as a person. I like to pick up old things and read it. Um, so that's kind of why I have the stuff that I do, and I like to make stuff. I build crap, and I'll buy stuff for projects or whatever. But um, it doesn't really define my craft, and I think that that's important. Is that people need to find what defines their craft, what makes your craft work. Your curses and hexes aren't going to work if you don't know how to do it. And if you don't have that, the energy attached to it, it's just you're playing with dirt or throwing some oil over your shoulder. I don't know, whatever you're doing.
Or you're playing with fire and you're gonna get fucked up if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have a hard time finding their own path or defining their own path because they're focusing more on what is my path when they should be focusing on how I do my path.
Well,
Because I think that's what really differentiates people's paths. We could all be sitting here and talking about the exact same thing, but we would go about it in a different way.
And I think that goes back to the books, a lot of teachers out there, the people that write these books, some of them, not all of them, kind of snub their nose at people that don't do it their way. But to me, they've lost the entire purpose of what we do. I mean, it's not about you. It's about our connection to everything else. It's about how we stand in this world. That's what it's about. It's not about what gown I wore to the last hoo-ha. I mean, it's not, right? I mean, are we all in agreement there? So if I take a book, I've read so many books, you guys have too, and it's frustrating because the mainstream books that you find are just completely off. They're a good starter point, but don't take it for gospel because that's not it. That's not all of it. And that's one thing I found later in life too, was that I would follow these books and follow these books, and it's like I never got anywhere, And then I realized, oh wait, it's kind of my path. I need to figure it out. And then once I started figuring it out, that's how I got into shamanic practice. Was that I just kind of felt more connected to that type of, practice, craft, whatever.
See, I'm more of an experimenter, and I've always been a little bit of a rebel with different things, so I don't think I ever followed a spell that was written the way it was written, like to the T. I add stuff, I'll take away stuff, I'll change stuff. I like to experiment with things like that, but at the same time, I'm also aware and prepared to pay any kind of consequences, have it maybe, for that. And I think that's also very important, especially when let's try to get back onto hex work. When you do hex work, because I'm getting sidetracked, when you do hex work, you have to be prepared. There might be some kind of consequences that in potentially causing harm or controlling somebody else is going to may alter your life as well as theirs, of course. So you have to be prepared that things may not turn out the way that you wanted, but usually they turn out the way that it needs to be done, has been my experience. What's that face, Amy?
Well, I agree with you.
But she doesn't agree with you.
Other than that one situation. I think that if you are I had heard someone describe it as seasoned I think that if you are well seasoned within your path and you are completely comfortable with doing it and you just like, yes, then things may not work out how you think they're going to, but they work out how they're supposed to, which I hate saying that because we're witches. I don't
Yeah,
want things to work out how they're supposed to all the time. Like,
sometimes spirit has different plans. You know
Right.
what I mean? And
oh, don't I know it?
yeah, I mean, we'll I can't tell you, even in just my own just making stuff, right? I may start out making something, and I actually had this conversation with somebody last night. I may start out making something with a piece, and it turned out completely different than what I thought, because that the, I have found that if it's not working the way that I'm doing it, there's a reason, right? And it doesn't want to be that way. I've had stones that I've wrapped the same way that I wrapped another stone, and I'll be damned if it didn't fall out because it didn't like it. And and people think that's weird, but it's true. There's energy in everything. So it's just, the craft or doing curse work and hex work is really no different. It's just, you know, it's going to come out the way that it's supposed to come out, like you said. There's a whole lot you can do about it.
Right. One of my situations is I did a hex on somebody, the person that was bothering me, and then the person found religion. They found Jesus. Jesus is always lost. They found Jesus, and because of that, they actually stopped bothering me.
It worked.
So that's not what I expected.
Found the baby Jesus. I found him once in my closet.
Was he with Waldo?
Yeah. They were hanging out and having ice cream.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Do you think that there's different level, like, okay, getting a little bit more into like the hexes and curses and stuff, do you think that there are different levels of hexing or cursing? Like, do you think people should start off with like a little baby hex and then grow up into like an adult hex? Just,
I think first you should define hex.
you want me to define hex?
Yeah.
I would say, if I was to define a hex, I would say doing a magical working that like that is knowingly malicious intent.
So is that different than a curse?
To me, no, not really. I mean, I guess I use hex and curse interchangeably. The only time that they really get separated for me is if you're talking about like hex signs.
So if I were to say
In Northern tradition folk magic, you have hex signs that are for healing, and for prosperity, and it's almost just like magic sign they call a hex sign.
so kind of like a sigil or a rune or
Right.
like
They call it a hex sign, so that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. But if I use the two interchangeably.
I agree with that, yeah. Deneen, did you have something to say to that?
I'm going to try to talk. Hopefully my voice doesn't go away. So I was going to say, in answer to your question about a little hex or a big hex, with my first hex that I did, you and I discussed it because a person actually was attacking my family and trying to come between my spouse and I. And it was just an ongoing thing for months. And finally, I just got at my wit's end, and I'm like, all right, so I obviously need to do something about this person. So to me, it was more of I wouldn't call that a little hex. I would call it a big hex because, I went and got an animal part and did my thing, and it worked very well, I might add. But at the same time, I think with the whole ethics thing, that if someone's just starting out, I don't think I should be doing something like that if I was like, let's say I just cracked open my first book. And I think that, having more mature witches or more seasoned witches that you can talk to and be like, okay, well, this is my issue, and this is what I want to do. And sometimes it helps if you have guidance where they're like, well, I don't think you should do that spell, or maybe try this. You know what I'm saying? Like, because some people would probably not go the route that I went when it was like so detrimental. Like, we were gonna probably end up in a divorce because this person was that adamant on destroying our family. And that's when I went to the last resort for a big hex rather than something small.
I agree with you. I think that people, and I hate to say it this way, there's hard to find. It's hard to find good teachers out there. Number one, and I know that. So I think that, you know, and then some people say, well, listen to spirit. What does spirit say? Some people mistake consciousness for, their conscious thought for spirit work, and that's a little bit, so that's kind of hard for me to say too. I agree with you. I think if somebody's going to do this, they need to find somebody that's willing, that's like on the up and up, and do your research. I mean, but even at that, it's difficult. I kind of flopped and floundered around for a long time too. I can't say little hex or big hex. I don't think you should be doing anything, as far as that's concerned. But maybe something, simple, but maybe to get rid of the, toenail that's ingrown or something. I don't know, but something. I don't think you should work on other
I think
people.
that's more of a healing.
Well, I don't know. Depends on how you
But
look.
again, depends on how you go about it.
I mean, I think a ingrown toenail, that's pretty malicious. I think that it would take a hex to get rid of that son of a bitch. But it's, man, I hate to say that because I don't want somebody out there going, well, John said. No, screw that. John didn't say shit. So.
Well, Blythe says go big or go home. If you get to the point where you're going to hex somebody, you need to just do it and get it done. And like I said earlier, I will reiterate that. You can try different things first. I had tried different things to try to make the communication smoother, make things better over the course of years. That didn't work. It was actually causing me a lot of emotional. It was causing a lot of issues within my own family, with me and with my kids. So I said, fuck you, I'm putting you in a jar, and that was it. And then he became a man of God. So that's how it worked out for him, and that's super awesome. And so now I'm dealing with that.
I mean, okay, so freezer, doing something like that might be okay. That's not really big.
Oh no, I tried the freezer too. It didn't work as effectively.
Jar work or whatever. I don't think that's big. I think that's probably okay.
Well, I think the biggest way you could do is killing somebody, and that you really have to take a good step of your ethics. That's not something that I was ever. It took me years to get to the point where I'd actually be able to do this against this particular person, because I knew they were going to be in my life or a part of or attached to for a very long time. So that really was not an option morally, ethically, as a human being. So no, but there are definitely other steps that you can take. When it comes to the point where you think about actually hexing somebody or causing harm or defending yourself or whatever the case may be, I think protection work is extremely important. But you have to. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this. Protecting yourself in general from the other person or the situation, and then also doing protection before you actually do the hex or the curse is very important. And I do not believe in threefold or anything coming back to you or anything like that. But if you do any kind of spirit work, you know that you have spirits, the other person is going to have them as well. And especially if you're doing work against a witch, which I would never really recommend. But they're going to combat that, or they're going to try to stop that work as well. So you need to protect yourself in case that does kind of come back to you. That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I had a thought to that, and I totally lost it. But I agree with you. And that's true. I mean, everybody has guides, whether they know it or not. So, and a lot of those guides have Well, you think about it. Probably there's a lot of indigenous background there too, so that there could very well be some repercussion that you can't handle, and
Mhm.
especially the whole witch war or cult war crap. That's just crap. I mean,
Mhm.
we should not be fighting each other. Number one. Number two, um, it's just stupid because you don't know how much, you know, how seasoned, as everybody said so far, how seasoned somebody may be. And they're gonna, somebody always knows more than you do. There's always somebody that knows more than you do. And if you throw something at someone, you got to be prepared to take the repercussion. And that's part of the reason that I don't get into that kind of crap is because I'm a sissy. So I don't want to be hurt. I'm a sissy. I am.
I'm a glutton for punishment, so that's probably why I just, go for the throat.
I think that for me, I'm like in between you two.
We
Because
are kind of actually
I'm
on.
definitely not a glutton for punishment. Like, no, I don't want any of that. But at the same time, that's where, like, I think the analytical side of me really kind of is advantageous to me because I don't do anything unless I know everything. So I don't do workings for other people. So usually it's for people that I know really well. So if I'm going to do a hex or something, then it's either just kind of, I don't give a shit what they do back, so I'm just going to make sure that I have my shit together. I'm on the same page with my ancestors and my spirit guides, and I've done divination, and I've got my protections up, and then we're going to nail it to a fucking tree. But then there are other times, where it's like, no, that's not really worth it to me right now because I don't really give a shit about that person. So
Yeah, it's like I could do something, or I could just see how this plays out. And usually I just see how it plays out.
yeah, that's
You
how I am.
kind of
I
have
just
to.
see how it plays out because 9 times out of 10, and I don't know if it's just how it plays out or if there's, magic in the whole act of, a witch doing that, where it's like, yeah, you don't mean anything to me. You're not worth my time. Go away. I mean, that's pretty potent
I
magic.
think that in its own is a way of protection, and it could also be a way of banishing. It's like, you're not worth my time, so just get out of my face.
And that's kind of how I've always done it. Is that I believe that the more energy you give it, the more effective it is, right? And that can work in reverse. So if you're scared of somebody doing that to you, you were talking about the threefold path earlier. I don't necessarily believe in the threefold path, but there are a lot of people that give that energy, right? So if they give it that energy, then it has something. It will come back to them in threefold, right? So but if we don't give it that energy, then it's not going to happen.
And I agree. I agree with that. It's like the threefold karma, law of return, whatever you want to call it, is seen more of a, the new Wicca thing, whatever you want to classify that, the new witchcraft. I don't see that in traditional witchcraft, in hoodoo, any kind of folk magic. I don't. It's more of
Magic and traditional witchcraft is like, hey man, do what you gotta do.
right. And what I see with that is, the other person's spirits could come after you, but it's not like some like force, like some unknown force. Usually if it's, somebody else's spirits coming after you, it's a known thing. It's their spirits coming after you. So you have to, protect yourself against that.
And again, I think that, a lot of protection work in itself, when you're talking about hexes and all that kind of stuff, is having a real solid relationship with your ancestors. Because you don't want to piss them off. You don't want them to be blindsided by some asshole spirit coming over and being like, meh, 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 meh. And you're like, oh, sorry, I meant to tell you, but.
And I think that that's where a lot of it comes from working with spirit. If you don't have that relationship, you can't talk to them, and sometimes they can give you better advice to what you're doing anyway. Should you really do it? Should you really mess with it? Is it worth your time? Right? But you're right. If they don't talk to your spirit, then spirit's maybe not you know, uh, ready for something like that. I hate to say that because that's not necessarily where I was going with it, but um, I think that I think if you work with spirit enough, I think you can better understand, and sometimes you can just work things out. You know, from an energetic level, if you work
Right.
with your guides and sometimes even their guides, they may come in and you guys can work together and work on it on a spiritual realm instead of trying to just you know immediately go to a hex or a curse or something like that. I think that there's other ways to handle that kind of a problem. But and sometimes it's just a simple misunderstanding. Sometimes, like yeah.
No, I agree with that. Sometimes I think with some people it's kind of with hexing it's kind of a necessary evil to be done because in a way this is one of those things that not a lot of people agree with me on. Sometimes hexing is a lesson that needs to be learned. The person that is on the receiving end needs to learn a lesson, so the witch is kind of used as a tool, probably from the other person's spirits, the receiver's spirits. They're used kind of as a tool to kind of put that into motion. So that is one of my beliefs as well.
But you could also say that instead of okay, what was I going to go with that? Do you think that say I was working with my guides and I asked my guides to handle it, is that hexing and cursing? Yes,
No.
kind of, sort of.
Well, you're kind of putting it in the guys' like it depends, I guess, on how they would. You're putting it in their hands, so how they go about it is however they go about it. I don't think if you're just telling them to handle it, that doesn't necessarily mean in a negative way.
I agree with that, and I think
Yeah.
that sometimes you can handle it that way. And I like I said, I don't do a lot of cursing and hexing. I don't necessarily need it. I most of the time just like whatever, and I go my own way. But um, sometimes it's your guides and spirits that you work with. If you work with them on a regular basis, like we've all been saying, I think that they can actually be more helpful in these types of situations than even spell work. You know, because they're at a different level entirely energetically, and a lot of times they just make that thing go away.
Mhm.
And I think that's a lot of spell work is anyways. You're just raising yourself to a specific level to that energy and sending that energy out. And I just covered myself. But and I think yeah, hey, high five. Um but that's kind of how I feel about it, and now how I do work is that I work with my guides and the spirits around me. I've been working with my guides since like I don't know for like almost 30 well over 30 years now I guess. So and I have a good relationship with them. I've had them come out in situations where I didn't really even think that they should be there or necessarily, but they were defensive. And if you work with them enough, they will be. They'll handle the situation. They don't have to. A lot of times, you don't have to do anything. And
Yes, I so agree with that.
damn
And
right.
I always feel kind of like pompous saying that, like, oh, my ancestors got this. I don't need to do shit. But I mean, really, it's true. I mean, really, the like spiritual team that I have that are doing, nothing but looking out for me and have my best interests, at heart. I mean, they'll take care of it a lot of the time, one way or the other. And that's why I do things like offerings for them, and that's why, I, honor them, and I have certain talismans and stuff like that I wear that I incorporate into my protection magic, to where if it was to break or something, it'd be like, oh, what's going on?
And I think a lot of the the hoodoo folk I've read about using mercury dimes as an indicator that you've walked through something. And I think that that's absolutely awesome that you work with your spirits that way. I don't know what I would do without them. I mean, I could tell a story, but we're getting close to time. But I've had them come out And come to find out, she was crazy. They were right. She was nuts. But I wasn't expecting them to come out when they did, and she saw them. And that was the funny thing is I hadn't told her anything about the group that I travel with, and she knew how many. So that tells me they were up front and handling business. Business.
Yeah,
So
and sometimes when you're talking about hexing and cursing and stuff, I mean, sometimes you can even get in touch with someone else's uh, spirit guides or ancestors to enact that hex or that curse because they're almost on your side as far as their understanding that their living person is not in alignment with what they should be or how they should be handling things. Like if you have a friend who's a drug addict, you could go to that person's ancestors and petition them to enact this curse or hex or anything. It doesn't have to just be a curse or a hex to get them to do whatever needs to, depending on what you actually do, and have them help you enact this working to have the outcome, which is for a positive outcome.
I've actually done that, and I've done that, and not any formal way, just kind of speaking, or you think about it as prayer, however you want to think about it. I didn't do any crazy rituals or offerings or anything, but I was like, listen, and I knew one of the spirits that watched was a relative that watched over this particular person too, so that helps. I was like, listen, can you just kick him in the ass and get him to just like behave and leave me alone and stop with these problems and everything else? And I think that incorporated with a couple other things, it stopped. It all stopped. And now this person actually has a lot more clarity on the things that were done and said, and it stopped. The bullshit stopped. So that is definitely very effective, is to just try to have a conversation with the other person's spirits, especially if you know them, and if you know them by name, that is even more effective.
Yeah, otherwise you have to go through the whole kind of proving your intentions.
Right.
All right, anything anybody else wanted to bring up since we're at our time here?
I think we're good. I think it was a good show. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think a lot of good information out there, and I think number one, find a good teacher. I think that's number one in all of it. I learn your path, learn your own way.
I think before you find a teacher, you need to figure out your own ethics. Figure out your ethics. Find a teacher that aligns with your ethics, and go from there. Because if you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know how you feel about something, you can't learn from somebody else.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good advice.
I agree. Try to have some common sense. Know your limits. And I guess we can throw in there, you guys can feel free to ask us anything on the page, or if we're friends, on Facebook or anything, feel free to ask. We will try and figure out this Q&A aspect to this thing at some point in time.
It worked the first show.
I know. We don't know what happened.
One thing I want to say about the page is, ask good quality questions. I mean, don't just come attacking. I don't want to see a lot of BS, because I'll just kick you, and I don't care.
Yeah.
But this is we're doing this show so people can get that, hopefully the information that they need. Find people that are, like Blythe said, in similar state of minds, or similar practices, so that we can, because there's not a lot of good information out there. The books are kind of, and some of the teachers are even worse. So hopefully, we can kind of guide people along. I mean, we've all taken from different people and learned from different teachers, and been doing this for a day. So sometimes we can help.
I have found that ethics in books is comparable to abstinence education, and is not effective at all. Because in books they teach you, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that.
That's not necessarily the case, yeah.
And
So
most books.
want
Get
we
out
want
there and
we want to try to
experience the
bring
world.
some effective information out to people, and
Right.
that's why we're here.
I hope that people take away from this, because we're just people that get together and talk about stuff, witchy stuff that we like to talk about. And I hope that other people will watch and take away from it just a desire to think for themselves. Like maybe they hear something and you're like, Blythe said something that, really made me think about something, or Amy said something that I just thought was really fucking stupid and made me think about something. And you know what I mean? Like, even I like watching YouTube channels, even if I don't agree with anything that they're saying, even if I'm watching it the whole time being like, this is fucking stupid. How is this even happening right now? Because I'll walk away from it thinking about that and trying to figure out what they meant, or maybe they meant this, or so it starts this whole thought process, which makes me talk to other people, which makes me come out of my shell, and I get a whole new experience just because I watched that show and disagreed with it. So I have an appreciation for shows, whether I agree with them or disagree with them, because as long as it makes me think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I hope people get from this show, is that it gets your thought gears grinding.
My thought gears.
Yeah. My thought gears are on this bag of McDonald's next to me, so I think that's all.
I smell my pot of chili on the stove cooking, so.
All right, well, we will have, again, the next show will be the first Saturday of next month. Are we doing that?
Yeah, I think we should do it every 2 weeks. Why not? Or
Every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
whatever we're doing. Twice a
Okay,
month.
so then it wouldn't be the first. Okay, all right. We'll
So
figure
it'll be the 20th.
Third. How about
the
first?
20th?
Yeah.
We'll post it.
We'll figure it out.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great
Bye.
day.